admitting all. Let's go to the admit all side. There we go. We're now 10:30. So good morning, Kevin. Good morning, Adrian. Morning, JQ. Morning, Chris. Morning, Tom. Morning, Rosalind. Morning, Aaron. Morning, Lisa. Morning, Shay. Thank you for joining. More joining as well. Good morning. Good morning. If you've just joined, if you could mute, please, that'd be great. Just to cut out any background noise. Morning, Julian. Morning, Derek. Morning, Steph. Good to see you. Good morning, Bobby. If you've just joined, please mute. Peter Bradley, if you could mute Peter, that'd be great. Henry's off. That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. Good. Okay. Brilliant. Okay. So, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this week's Coffee Morning Pension Playpen. We're delighted to have Guy Opperman join us, who has a lot to say, I think. And Henry will be acting as the host today to ask Guy a series of questions, and which hopefully you'll enjoy. Obviously, in typical Playpen fashion, if you would like to ask Guy a question or make a point and challenge or agree with Guy, then please raise a hand. We will also open up the chat room as well, so you can make some comments in there or any links to any sites. So without any further ado, I'll pass to Henry. But before I do, we are being recorded. Rosalind, Guy, Henry, Kevin, everybody's happy to be recorded. So that's fine. Okay. So the recording will be available later today with the podcast. So there you go. So without any further ado, Henry, I'll pass to you first, just to sort of lay the scene, and then I'll monitor the lobby. So over to you.
Okay. Well, thanks, Steve, and hi, Guy. And this is must be quite a difficult week for you, seeing all your former colleagues going back to work, and you're not one of them anymore. Would you rather be an MP right now than what you are? That's my first question.
Good morning, folks, and thank you for the kind invitation. I suppose my take would be, listen, I wanted to win the last general election, both personally and as a government, but that door is closed. There's no doubt whatsoever. Comprehensively, the people made a decision and have moved on. For me, I think if you'd offered me 14 years as a member of Parliament, 12 years in government, 4 different departments, mainly at DWP, I would have bitten your hand off. That would have been an amazing opportunity, and to ride that pony for as long as you could is an amazing opportunity. So I have no regrets whatsoever in any way, shape or form. There are other opportunities ahead. I had 2 proper jobs before, whether as a barrister or running a business, and as a very, very poor jockey. And I can have other opportunities going forward, and I look forward to doing that. I have to say, there is a separate issue, which is being a member of Parliament is an amazing honour and a privilege. And being a backbencher, even in opposition, is still amazing. Don't misunderestimate your capacity to make a difference for that. And that's what I really, really enjoyed. I think it would be a very, very tough gig, though, to be a opposition member when the present government has got such a big majority. And even if they are getting it wrong, they will, by and large, just ignore you. So that, I think, is a very tough gig. But hey, you get on with that as a member of the opposition and as a backbencher.
Okay, which answers my next question. By the way, all these questions have come from the audience, so thank you very much to everyone who's sort of mailed them in. And you've really said, well, what makes it worthwhile for you? But looking back over your 14 years, and in particular the 5 years when you were, or more than 5 years in which you were pensions minister, what would you say you would want to be remembered for? What do you expect to be remembered for? I expect there are probably 2 different answers, but perhaps you could address both.
So I think the biggest sort of achievements would be things like getting AE to 8% without the world changing, noticing, or frankly making any awareness of that, particularly in a post-Brexit world, which was complicated, as all of us understood. Then implementing everything from ESG to TCFD, and slightly trying to stabilize the DB market as it was at that particular time, and a sort of at a moment when it was not necessarily as stable as it could have been. those are the sort of positives. I will come to my sort of advice to Emma Reynolds in a second, but I regret my lack of ambition and forcing things through as given the time I had. I think it goes back to, if you've read Tony Blair's book, probably the politician I most admire, he always talks about his first term being actually a term when he should have done a lot more rather than just try to win the next general election. And I'm not denying that he did quite a lot, but I felt very strongly, with the benefit of hindsight, should have been way more robust. But you can't do that. And we'll come to that in relation to Emma in a second. You can't do that unless you have full backing from the Treasury, unless there is an appetite for risk, and unless the PM and the key special advisors in government are utterly behind you. And that will be the big dilemma for all actions over the next 5 years. And to be honest, will always be the issue in relation to anything in respect to pensions.
That's very interesting you say that. So do you feel that you didn't have the full support of your cabinet behind you in what you were trying to do with pensions?
So I think that would be harsh of me to put it that way. It's a question of pace and scale and the degree to which you are able to fight your corner in quite a crowded world. So look, there's only about 30 pieces of legislation that government brings forward every year, right? Of which only about 20 are substantial bills. So you've got to fight in your department to be the bill that they're going to do. You've then got to fight to make that sufficient clout. An easy example is I was able to get a pension schemes bill over the line, but it took several years to do so. But at the time, I was told by Treasury, you can't include things like automatic enrolment extension at that particular stage. We'll do that later. And I frankly I wish I'd had the capacity to steamroll that through. I didn't, and I then had to sort of work the system as best I possibly could to get it through in the last days of the government. That's an example of where if you don't have the super clout, you struggle to get the capacity to do these things. So let me give you an example that we're facing a new government, and good luck to them. I wish them well. I want my country to do well, who are proposing a new pension schemes bill. Most of the contents of said bill would be stuff that I frankly started working on 3-4 years ago. Some of it, if they do super funds, that's something I started, I think, 6 years ago. So the degree to which they want to be ambitious and to drive stuff forward, by the time you've had to think about it, consulted on it, drafted stuff, we're already 2 years into Parliament at best. And then you're in a position that you're late in the Parliament, and everybody's going, well, I want to do more retail, electorally sexy stuff than necessarily long-term pensions reform. So driving that stuff forward early and having really clear narrative, I felt I didn't necessarily have that, and I didn't necessarily have the buy-in from the Treasury, and also tough gig trying to be a minister in COVID. I can't tell you enough. Particularly I was shielding myself, so trying to drive that forward in a remote setting without being able to wander into number 10 and sit down with the key advisors and say, look, come on, let's do this and let's do that, and this is how we need to do this, and thrashing it out was more complicated. So it's not that I have any regret about that. It's just the pace and scale of change and your ability to take the rest of government with you. If I have a regret, I could write a book on the complexities and difficulties of getting Dashboard over the line. I respect and admire many of the people who have spent many a year with me on that journey. I have to say, it is a matter of supreme disappointment to me that we are still in 2024 and we have not got a project that I was certain would be over the line by this stage over the line. And that is there's a lot of sadness in that, and there's a lot of money that didn't necessarily get used in the right way, and people didn't really own a project. And you only succeed in government if you own a particular project in a way that you take full responsibility for it. And that is difficult in government, particularly when you've got multiple different organizations, as we'll discuss in terms of things like the pensions review and why things like LTAF have not worked. It's because there are multiple different agencies involved. They're not working because nobody's really owning it. So if Emma is to succeed on these things, she's important, but way more important is the Chancellor and the PM, and they have to own stuff.
I suppose she's got one advantage over you in that she's a minister in the Treasury and a minister in the DWP. Do you think that will work?
The answer is yes, to a degree, in the sense of there is a nervousness that I cannot overstate as a minister. You try really, everyone does the power of three. What do I need to do in the short term, the medium term, and the longer term, right? As a minister, you are inundated with short-term requests, okay? And you're constantly doing debates in the main chamber, Westminster Hall. You answer 20 parliamentary questions a day, which have got to be precisely right, and you've got to check everything. The day-to-day grind, and it's not a grind, it's a pleasure, but the day-to-day activity as a minister really bogs you down. So it's very hard to see the wood from the trees. And I know she's experienced and I know she's got a good record in finance, but that tsunami, when it hits you and you're trying to, she's trying to grapple, I know she is, winter fuel payment and all the fun and games of that. She's trying to grapple with, triple lock and all of those malarkeys. And we're talking private pensions. Trust me, there's a ton of state pension and other stuff that you've got to deal with in terms of benefits and all manner of other things. They're in a spending review, which is always fun. I've done several of them. They are never a good situation. And I respect and admire, of course, all the civil servant accountants in the finance teams, but their approach to things is interesting, to say the least. Winter fuel is a classic example of a bunch of Treasury accountants coming in and saying, here's 1.5 billion, we can take this away from a bunch of millionaires. No one will have any impact. Don't worry, will it be fine? Everyone will take up pension credit. It just does not work like that. But that's what happens when you get into speedy spending reviews and finance teams taking over. So the day-to-day will bog her down, all right? But it is definitely a good thing. And my point about the day-to-day is you're now in two departments, so you'll have to answer for two different bits in those departments. So don't imagine it's a total benefit, because the Treasurer will want their pound of flesh of the minister answering this, and you've got to do questions and you've got to do debates. So that will bog her down, but it is definitely a good thing that she is in the heart of the Treasury. And much more important than Emma's double ministerial role, and it makes a difference, it definitely is a positive, is the fact that the Chancellor and or the PM seem very engaged in this process. All right, that's by far more important, because if the Chancellor's not behind you in your policy, then you will struggle. And if the Chancellor regards it as one of her 3 or 5 big priorities, which she clearly does, then you are in a much better position, because kind of what you learn as a minister is you make a difference as a minister. You definitely do. But if the Chancellor says this is something we really want to do, then it happens. The full might of the Treasury cannot be understated. And if the Treasury in various civil servant forms want to block stuff, it just doesn't happen.
I guess from what you're saying, but it was very difficult for you to link your agenda and the Treasury's agenda on some of the points you were trying to get through. And I guess it sounds like it's probably easier for Emma having a foot in both camps in that respect.
Oh, it helps. It definitely helps. Let me give you an easy example. So I was the financial inclusion minister, right? And yet most of the policy levers were held by Treasury. So I was the one trying to make a difference in the financial inclusion space, and yet Treasury, by and large, would like the great British public to spend money, not to save it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and obviously the longer term, medium to longer term agenda for the Treasury and the DWP are very much aligned. We want to see longer term investment in productive finance through the kind of vehicles that you've been advocating, CDC and maybe some kind of revival of DB through super funds running on rather than moving into skanky annuities. No, I didn't say that, sorry. And all that stuff is it seems to me to be working. But I totally get what you're saying. But in the short term, she's beset by everyone from Wasby to Ros Altman and possibly you, I don't know, having a go.
I mean, I think it's a little harsh on Ros, but
she'd be quite vociferous.
So, I mean, I'm a critical friend in the sense of I've been there on winter fuel payment, and I have been in the conversations with Treasury officials who say this 1.5 billion we could lop off the government finances looks so easy, and anyone in difficulties just gets pension credit. Yippee do, happy days, and it's good politics because those millionaires stop getting winter fuel payment. Those sort of conversations are very difficult because unless you've got really good arguments to rebut them, you just get steamrolled, and that is difficult. And you're right, resolving the Wasby post-ombudsman decision, however bizarre and interesting it is a difficult problem to deal with, which again Treasury will have very strong views about, as Treasury always do. I mean, you talked about illiquids. I mean, for me, that's the big test of where the Treasury is at and where the Chancellor is at. Because not that I was going to subtitle this talk sort of, is it deja vu all over again? Because I've been there on a long journey, and some of you have heard me give some probably quite turgid speeches on illiquids and how it would be great if DC and DB spent more money on the great British economy and invested in productive finance and built things, and how, you've heard me give the speech many times. In fact, I went so far as to create various vehicles to do that. And I look back at my notes, and in March 2022, I had a lovely meeting with the Productive Finance Working Group, which had done a lovely report. Many people, I can see some of the people who were on the call then. I did, LTAF, we created. We took so much time trying to create long-term asset fund, and with no disrespect, I consider it a failure. It just did not produce the outcomes that we were seeking, notwithstanding having the full might of Nico Ratti, the FCA, Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, Treasury ministers, lots of Treasury officials, and yet it just hasn't got anything over the line.
A lot of people will be surprised to hear you say that, because there seems to be an LTAF being launched every week by one insurance company or another. And isn't it just a question of waiting and LTAF will come along? You're more sceptical of LTAF.
If it was so good, why is the previous Chancellor, launching the Mansion House Agreement, and why is the present Chancellor saying it's not really working, such that I'm now going to do another review and really fire up proper investment in illiquids and productive finance? Now, maybe I'm being a little bit cynical, and I will be delighted. Trust me, it's been so long on LTAF, I'd be delighted to be proven wrong. So if that is a genuinely kickstarting real change in the investment strategies and the outcomes for this country, amazing. My take is the Chancellor and the previous Chancellor would not have done what they're doing if they felt it was going absolutely perfectly, because that was meant to be the solution. The whole, we did so much work on productive finance from about 2020 through to about 2022, 23. Obviously, I wasn't the minister by the time the Mansion House speech came along, but most of it I could have written. And that change, I think, is good, but I just think it's a poverty of ambition. I mean, I clearly, at the time, I couldn't have said that Jeremy Hunt, who's a good friend of mine, that genuinely 5% by 2030 is the summit of our ambition in this country. If that,
I couldn't agree. I couldn't agree with you more. If that's the best you can do,
it's and the fact that we all, the various companies enthusiastically, some of whose representatives, esteemed colleagues, are on the call, enthusiastically said this is a game-changing agreement, and we will now be really excited about this, and we're going to do this. I'm thinking it's not. Frankly, it's good. It's better than nothing. But if you really want to move the dial, you need an awful lot more than 5%. And that's where Emma's and the Chancellor's decision is really interesting, because if I leave it to a sort of voluntary agreement, you're always going to get low percentages. All right. And it's exactly the same with dashboard. If I leave it to the industry, it won't happen. So you have to then decide, how are you going to nudge, cajole, coerce, or mandate action by the industry in whatever space you want to do. So I did everything possible I could in dashboard. I probably should have done more in benefit of hindsight. I should have just plowed on, frankly. But I got persuaded at the end to, and then obviously events got in the way. But in respect of productive finance and illiquids, there's no doubt whatsoever, if they want to do more, they've got to be way more robust with the industry, in my view.
I've got a couple of questions.
Sure.
I'm going to bring in Tom, who is, I know, an old friend of yours, and then I'm going to ask Porrick to ask a question. But Tom first. Do you want to sort of unmute Tom
Thanks, Henry. Guy, good to see you again. I want to pick up on a couple of things you sort of alluded to in your opening comments around Blair and wishing he'd been more ambitious and needing to push through stuff and needing to be robust about stuff. And my own limited experience of dealing with the public sector and with arm's length bodies is that things happen pretty slowly. And that seems, you seem to be sort of echoing similar comments there. I guess my question is around public sector productivity. We've seen recent pay rises for the public sector that weren't conditional. And I'd just be interested in your comments around public sector productivity and whether it needs reform, whether it's fit for purpose at the moment, whether, if you had a magic wand, what would you do in that space, or nothing at all? Thanks.
So good to chat again. So it's easy to be critical when you're not in government. All right. So being an armchair critic in government is really, from outside government, is really easy. So on the one hand, you really want to end the train strikes and you want to end doctors and nurses strikes. Of course you do. And clearly I had 10,000 civil servants working for me directly in 700 job centres as employment minister, and more than that in pensions. And you want to try and resolve those, and there is an argument that resolving them will boost the economy, etc., etc. But I think they've made a massive error. I really do. And I think this country will rue the day that they agreed to the settlements that they did as speedily as they did, without any add-ons whatsoever. And the blunt truth is, it doesn't matter which government is in play here, for a variety of reasons, our productivity is painful, I'm afraid, and is really not progressing as we would like it to be. And we need to take a good, long, hard look at that. Most public sector change has to happen under a Labour government, because the practical truth of that is it's extraordinarily hard for the Conservative government, for example, to reform something like the NHS. Okay, for reasons that we all understand and know. Apparently, we've been trying to privatise it, obviously very unsuccessfully, for the last 75 years. Okay, but a Labour government should unquestionably be trying to improve the productivity, outcomes, and performance of the NHS and other parts of the public service, and to sign up to things like train drivers going from 61,000 to 69,000 without any kind of productivity increases is madness. And inevitably what will happen, trust me, I've been there, we will have a whole wave of public sector pay demands over the next 6, 12, and then when it really gets messy, 24, 36 months. And you can have an argument about fiscal headroom now. That fiscal headroom will disappear under that onslaught. And there's always a more deserving case. And as I've done question time, where you have to fight back about why it is you have to keep a lid on public sector pay and things like that, particularly in tricky times when we are overborrowed and overtaxed already. And those are very difficult arguments to have. A new government with a massive majority can do those things, though, and definitely should have done. So I regret to say they had a poverty of ambition. They settled too quickly, and it will really, really come back to bite them. I hope it doesn't. Genuinely, we all want this country to do well, but I have a very pretty clear view that that's not what's going to happen.
Okay, that's interesting, and it touches on transport, which of course is your second love as a minister. I guess you didn't get to resolve those strikes while you were a minister.
Well, I wasn't in charge of trains, so that was a blessing.
Yeah.
So poor Hugh Merriman was negotiating with all the train drivers and LNER and everything like
Yeah.
that. Although it was the private sector providers who were doing most of that. But yeah, you still have got. They've made a decision, for example, to scrap our reforms to civil service numbers. So the civil service numbers were going to go back to 2016-17 numbers, which when I last checked, the world didn't come to an end. And DWP could go back to 2016-17 numbers without a shadow of a doubt. But we are way bigger than we were at those particular times. And there is no, even in DWP, there is no real appetite to drive forward productivity changes, would be my take. I don't know the nuts and bolts enough about it, but it's on sheer numbers. That's the bottom line.
That's a very bizarre thing to happen under a Conservative government, to see government expanding at that rate.
Well, we did it. There was a good reason. So post COVID, when I was running the job centres, we deliberately expanded massively to try and get the country back to work. Handling the numbers of people, the millions of people who went on to universal credit, and then trying to get them back into work and trying to navigate this country back to a more traditional economy was incredibly difficult. So I genuinely recruited thousands of work coaches in job centres up and down the country to try and address that. Now, that's not easy. And, they're trying to do workplace reforms. Again, that is not easy stuff. You'll be able to, we can have a longer chat about it another time.
Okay, and we will move on. Porrick.
Yeah, thanks, Henry. Guy, just a quick point on dashboards before we move on to other matters. You've wished the new minister well in trying to deal with this issue, and you've suggested that you were frustrated by having a bigger, older, noisier brother in Treasury getting their bidding done ahead of yourself. But what else? What are the other reasons? You've had a couple of months now to staunch the flow of blood and reflect on what happened. Are there other reasons and regrets that why we haven't got a project which you've just admitted was one you thought would be seen through? For instance, should we regret giving the task to the Great White Elephant of Holborn, for instance, because their productivity has been woeful ever since they were brought into being. So
yeah, let me try and address that, because I'll do it to a degree, but then I'm not going to get into a sort of post-mortem about dashboard, he said, she said. But bluntly, the decision was made that dashboard should be run by an arm's length organisation, right? And by the likes of Chris Curry and others would have the day-to-day control. And I, as minister, would have the overall control and would meet with them on a regular basis and oversee that. And a combination of the dashboard delivery group and the Money and Pension Service were fundamentally in charge of that. Did they succeed in the project that we set them? Clearly not. There's no doubt whatsoever. And the commissioning process on the platform itself has clearly not gone as we would like to have gone. But I'm going to pause there partly because I left. I wouldn't say it was going perfectly when I left, but I left still thinking that this was a project that would be able to be got over the line. And other ministers took over, and I'm not party to the absolute nuts and bolts discussions and the post-mortems in MAPS and elsewhere as to why it didn't get over the line. Listen, we have a fundamental problem, and I listened to, I can't remember which podcast it was talking about data recently. I think it might have been Tom's. I'm not trying to plug his podcast, but there was a podcast recently on data, and our data in our pension system is interesting to say the least. And it is quite clear that it is exceptionally difficult to get a dashboard over the line when the quality of the data and the money spent by the CFO to upgrade the data is limited. So you can say quite bluntly that the individual organizations themselves are not getting themselves dashboard ready. I think that is a legitimate criticism. But you also can say that government in its various shapes or forms, whether arm's length or directly as minister, and ultimately I take the blame for everything, then you didn't produce and get over the line by 2024, for example, a dashboard project.
So did the Treasury give you a hospital pass, Guy, with a dashboard, or did you take it from them voluntarily back in, was it 2019 or 20 that you took it on?
No, it was earlier than that. So the answer is, it doesn't matter which element of government is running it, provided they run it well and they have the right people who can deliver. That's part of the problem with public sector productivity. So I wanted to run it, and I would be very happy to do so. And we drove it forward, and we managed to get the legislation and all of that. I'm very happy with. It wasn't a lack of cash our end. I think it's very hard to get people who are good people to work in government. All right. So everyone on this call, without a shadow of a doubt, would have earned more than I did as a member of parliament, because the private sector is paid way better than the public sector. All right.
Oh, yeah, because we're all much better than you. You should have given it to the private sector.
I accept that.
We would have sorted it out.
But
everyone knows that.
But my serious point is that getting good people to run stuff in government for government pay is very, very difficult. And sadly, that is one of the conclusions that you've got to draw about how it is that we managed to that we have delayed. I hope dashboard will be finally got over the line, getting dashboard as quickly as we possibly could have done it. I won't say
Treasury did, okay. I'll shut up.
It's not a Treasury dig on dashboard. It isn't really, because I mean I could have had the legislation a bit earlier, but I don't think. Here's the problem. I'm not totally convinced, even if I'd had the legislation earlier, that the schemes would have got their data in order to be ready for such legislation, unless you're really going to find them and really penalise them. And the appetite for doing that is limited.
Okay, right. We will leave it there. Well, unless Barry's question is on dashboards, which it may be. Barry, you have your hand up.
Yes, it's more general. Thanks, Guy. You talked about the support that in order to get things over the line, you need the support of Treasury and the PM. But I've always wondered, and you may feel you can't even answer this, but obviously you need a lot of support from the civil servants, and I've always wondered whether civil servants, were you frustrated by their support, or were they genuinely supportive? And do you think it's different under a Labour government than a Conservative one?
Okay, the last one's a very interesting one. So I'm slightly Mark Antony here. So I genuinely come to praise the civil service, not to criticise them. So I really respect and admire many of the people who I worked with in DWP and some in Treasury as well. They are, there's some we are blessed in two of the departments I was in. Doesn't apply in lots of them. So in Home Office, the churn is massive, and we can see the problems with that, right? But in DWP and Department for Transport, where I spent the last 10 months of my career, you get people who've done it 10, 15 years, who really know their stuff, who come in and go out and genuinely are well organized. There is, I did a select committee with the amazing Jo Gibson. She is exceptional. She's now at Treasury. I did various bits of work with some really impressive people who drove forward TCFD. They were outstandingly capable, knew as much, if not more, than anyone in the private sector, and genuinely were outstanding. So I was also blessed by an amazing private office. That doesn't always apply. Sometimes people have pretty awful private offices, and that's very, very difficult. I think, so the quality of the civil servants, I don't think necessarily is a problem. I think we are a massively timorous society. So we consult on everything. We are scared of making radical and robust decisions. And when we do, everybody has a pop at the individual and says, but you're not thinking this through. So I think the pace of government is very, very slow. And that encourages civil servants to be relatively slow in their outputs and their outcomes. And that's difficult. In pensions, that's not surprising, because clearly we're dealing with a 40-year product that really matters, that is clearly something that it's not like you're going to make snap decisions. But I found that across government, it just takes a long time to do stuff in government. Will it be better or worse under a new government? I think there's a degree to which a fresh government with a big majority always makes a difference. You know, the only thing that a civil servant wants is a decent majority, because it allows you to do stuff. There is a danger that if you are, you know, I was a whip and then a minister in the interesting days when Theresa May was relying upon the DUP for a working majority. It's not an easy situation whatsoever. I took the welfare reform bill through as the whip in 2015/16 with a tiny majority. That was exceptionally difficult. You know, it was the last proper welfare reform bill. Because if you don't have a decent majority, your ability to run stuff through the House of Commons and the Lords is very limited. So I think fresh government is always a fresh start. I think the civil service, you know, it's easy to criticize them. I found them, if you set them a very clear task, and that's the clarity of vision is absolutely key. If you set them a very clear task, they would do it. You know, winter fuel is a great example. Minister, if you want to cut winter fuel payment from millions of pensioners, we'll get on with it. We will try and get people to sign up to pension credit. Good luck with that. But if that's the instruction you're giving us, we'll crack on with it.
Pension Credit Week, Guy.
I know it is. I invented it. I invented Pension Credit Week. So yeah, I'm acutely aware of it. But my point is, it's very easy stuff for journalists and occasionally politicians to have a dig at civil servants. I don't think that they are the problem. You need to set the parameters, and the state of government is more of a problem. It's slow.
I think one thing, Rosalind, I'm going to come to your question in a second, but one thing that frustrates a lot of us, especially people of my age who desperately want to turn their pots to pensions, is that we've yet to get really that facility. So we haven't really got it from CDC yet. We've got one scheme which is going to start in the month, and we've got, you know, plans for more, and we haven't really done much beyond what George Osborne did, which was to create freedom to actually give people meaningful defaults as retirement options, which pay them something which is close to what you and I know as a pension. And this frustrates me beyond measure. We've had conversations about this. I don't want to bang my own drum on this, because, you know, I'm trying to do something about that. But, you know, looking back, you know, and we've got a question on this, 2014 announcement, 2015 implementation of pension freedoms. That happened pretty damn quick. Yeah. What's happened since then? Pretty damn slow.
So there is a lot more we should and can be doing on decumulation. All right. There's no doubt whatsoever about it. And I don't dispute that. I don't think, particularly in the AEDC world, it's still early days. If you make a comparison to, as I always do, with Australia, we're not in a bad place on decumulation, in my humble opinion. That doesn't mean to say we shouldn't be doing more and having a proper pathway to bigger and better stuff, but I don't necessarily think that there isn't a crisis there. But at the same stage, if this is a two-term government, which it probably is going to be, you would hope that by sort of 2028 to 2030, proper decumulation would be happening. Now, I don't think there is any desire to embrace or address that in the government at the present stage. But again, that's what a pensions review is all about, and trying to work that through.
Well, it's in the pension schemes bill, isn't it? There is a section of the pension schemes bill, but you see that as a return.
So I've drafted several pension schemes bills, and the fact that they say it's in the pension schemes bill doesn't mean a thing until it is in the pension schemes bill. you know, it's a bit like your grandmother's stew. When you're drafting legislation, you throw in every single thing in the kitchen sink. What actually then comes out is, and a good example is, so I would have included the extension of AE in the pension schemes bill, but that got cut out as the process went ahead, because you went down to basically three major things, which was dashboard, CDC, and DB reform. Now, you know, pension schemes bills are very big. They're very cumbersome. They take a lot of time. You won't have the bandwidth to cover everything. Trust me. And you won't have consulted on everything, and you will need to consult on everything. So the truth is, you're looking at least two bills in this Parliament, in my view. And that would be my advice to them. You know, crack on with the stuff that you really want to do. And that's clearly linked to the growth agenda. All right. So that they should, the first thing they should be doing is make a proper decision about how you're going to do liquids and productive finance. And in my view, there is very clear choices there. If it's more of the same, then not much more different will happen, in my view. They've got to be radical and they've got to be bold. And that has consequences both ways. But if that's your big target and you want to see growth on the back of pension scheme investment, then that's what you've got to do. Now, that's clearly their main priority. Everything else is a secondary or tertiary priority. And that, I suspect, will end up in a second or third bill.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to come back to you, Roger. I'm not forgotten you, but I want to ask one more question about this, because you mentioned early on that you tried to get super funds over the line in, what, 2017, 18?
Yeah, it's the longest consultation, as far as I'm aware, that DWP have ever done without being responded to.
Without being responded to, but it did eventually get responded to under Laura. And thank goodness that we got somewhere on that, because it looks like we might actually get DB schemes running on rather than the inevitable consequence of annuities. I will not rabbit on it for John Quinlivan whacks me over the head. But, you know, do you think that in one way or form, we will see a continuation of DB in run-on because of the work that's been done, firstly by you post 2022 and your successors, and indeed Anna Reynolds?
Yeah, I think we do. Again, the question is, what is the appetite? Is a super fund going to be a DWP pension product? All right. Are the ABI going to say, no, you're putting tanks on our lawn and we don't want you to do this, and there's arbitrage is potentially happening? Is it the situation? You know, there is a choices of how you structure these things and how you ambitious you are. Now, in my view, it is very, very clear that this is a DWP pension product, that there is no threat, frankly, in any way whatsoever to insurance and ABI organizations, and that the two things can coexist, and that we should proceed as per the original consultation. We had that battle, though, for literally years, and those are the sort of things that the Treasury ultimately are going to have to make a decision on, as to what the final form of these things looks like, and is there capacity for profit?
You can see my point. There are three things here. There's CDC, which is a run-on long-term pension product. You've got DB, which is a run-on long-term pension product, and you've got whatever you see as your default retirement options out of DC as a long-term run-on retirement product, and all three of them are supporting the productive finance. But I can't see how you can get productive finance into pensions unless you support the investment of pensions in the long term as a decumulation product.
Listen, I totally agree with you, but here's the point: Treasury have to see it that way as well.
Well, we've got a single minister in Treasury and DWP, sure, so hopefully.
Agreed. And I listen. If it comes down to what are your priorities in government. If your priority is growth and investment by pension funds in the things that we've talked about, then what are the vehicles you can do that with? And fine, then inevitably your certainty of the argument will prevail. But there will also be people who will say, but there is risk involved here. But we want investment in ABI will clearly kick off. You know, I've been in this ballpark previously. Trust me.
I will now shut up and allow Rosalind to ask her question. Rosalind.
Thank you very much. I wanted to get back to a point which is something you were talking about earlier, which is less about policy and how governments can and cannot make things better, but more to do with the way that government engages. You were talking earlier about things being slow and, you know, it just taking a very long time to get things done and that being a public sector issue. One of the things I have noticed in 25 or so years of responding to consultations, often as part of non-lobbying groups like the APL that isn't taking a position so much as saying that, look, if you want to do X, then there's a problem with doing it the way you're doing it now because this doesn't fit with this. My experience is there's definitely been a drop-off, and I don't know that it's party political, but over time there has been a drop-off in responsiveness. So definitely there are still consultations on everything, but certainly projects I've been involved in the last few years, I've been disappointed about situations where experts are saying, look, if you want to do X, which you are trying to do, this is the problem you will hit, or this is one of the problems, and you could probably do something about it with X or Y. And just being told, oh yeah, but the policy is we want to do it this way anyway. And it's like we all find when we have clients who say, oh, I'd much rather do it this way. And you say, great, but if you do, you'll go to jail. You know, that sometimes they just won't listen. And I've thought there's been less responsiveness. And firstly, I wanted to know whether that was something you thought was a fair observation. And secondly, if you've any idea why or where it comes from, because I don't think it comes from individuals being difficult. It just seems to be culturally there's a shift.
So I think I wouldn't, I've got to choose my words carefully because I'm talking about some lovely civil servants who I know and love. So I don't fundamentally disagree with you. It is patently clear that the number of responses to consultations has gone down. Why? Because we never stopped consulting on stuff and didn't do enough stuff, right? Bluntly, all right? And people got consultation fatigue, no question, all right? And there will be dozens of people in this chat who would be going, oh God, I've got to do another response as part of my job to another DWP or Treasury consultation. My heart sinks. And basically, I can probably cut and paste the last one I did when Guy sent this out 2 to 3 years ago, and tweak it and just say, oh gosh, this is an amazing new initiative by the government. I'm being a cynic, but obviously none of you would ever do that much. So I think we've consulted way too much. The second bit is at the end of governments, people get less engaged with government. All right, without any shadow of a doubt. When you think a government is checking out, you as esteemed professionals will think, well, who is going to take over coming forward? And we'll chat to them, or we're not sure that any of this stuff will happen anyway because a new government will come in and we'll scrap it. All right. So you can see examples of that up and down, government in various departments where people would have thought, if the Labour Party get in, this will never happen. And sure enough, Labour Party's got in and it hasn't happened, or they've scrapped an idea, So there's a degree to which that inevitably happens. I think that is true. When I was a humble lawyer, I used to, my last client was Ed Balls when he was Secretary of State for Education. And I represented government on a repeat basis under the Labour government. And I occasionally sued the Labour government as a barrister on behalf of various clients. We used to have an expression, which is we were always consulted, but always ignored. And there is a degree to which proper consultation, does it actually change the policy? I'd like to think that the process that different process is LTAF, for example, where in reality we did stuff, but we did it following multiple meetings which were very much discussion meetings as we're having now, where we're thrashing out, you know, can you do this? Can you do that? How long can you carry a particular, you know, what are your interest rates? What's your rates on this? You know, all of these malarkeys, we had a proper debate about. There is no doubt that as a minister, officials will come to you and say, we've got to consult on this. And you've got to push back like mad and say, is it absolutely necessary? Do we have to do this? Can we do it by guidance? And we all get and have seen, I've done it myself, stuff that you don't necessarily think is very important, but then turns out to be very important. An example is ESG and TCFD. And other stuff that I changed and tweaked in pensions legislation, where I look back and think, why on earth was I bothering with that? And that is slightly individual civil servants in their individual portfolios, not justifying their existence, but dealing with an issue that has been bothering them or they would like to address for some period of time. But Rosalind, you're not fundamentally wrong.
I'm going to move on now. I hope, Rosalind, that you have the right to reply elsewhere. I know you're extremely vocal on this, but I want to get to Jim and I want to get to David. Jim, first.
Thanks, Henry. Thank you, Guy, for coming to talk to us. I was just wondering if you might sort of say a few words about how the LGPS pooling was perceived by your department, and whether you think that there is much more to be learned from the Maple 8 model and more improvements to be made in that area.
So it's no secret that I tried to grab a hold of LGPS when I was in government as a minister. I got told quite robustly, oh, you just don't understand local authorities and we don't want to do that. And it was a bit computer said no. So I'm delighted about the decision. I think it makes sense. The individual civil servants who ran LGPS pensions at the DCLG as it was then, very lovely people, but you do think you're not the full might of the Treasury and DWP. So it makes, in my view, it makes total sense. You cannot be a massive consolidator, whether by politely cajoling or mandating, which I am, all three. And as I would consolidate, to use the Michael Heseltine expression, before breakfast, lunch, and dinner. All right. So you cannot be a massive consolidator without looking at LGPS and thinking, this is just not working. All right. And I would massively consolidate and I would be exceptionally robust about it. And again, here's the test of Treasury. Here's the test of PM's appetite for change. And there are some, clearly, I've met them. Lothian is a good example. Others are good examples. You know, we all can dig up examples of good LGPS schemes. And there is some very clever stuff that I admire, like what Cambridge and Counties Bank are doing is, in my view, exceptional. But the vast majority would greatly benefit from scale, professional trustees running it in a very different way, and some degree of government direction. So I think it's a really good decision. I think I would go way further. My advice to Emma would be think of what is radical, almost double it, and then crack on.
Very good. David.
Morning, thank you. Sorry, I missed the first few meetings, so apologies if this has been covered, but I just wanted to get your view on the status of the 2017 automatic enrolment changes. You said, I think quite rightly, that Treasury's view is it would generally prefer people to be spending money rather than saving it. Clearly, any decision to actually implement this would have to go through the budget scorecard. That's a very sensitive process. Treasury probably holds all the hands in, holds all the cards in negotiation. There have been good reasons not to do it quickly, cost of living crisis, COVID, and so on. But just given all of that, you know, do you think, looking back, you would have expected this to be implemented sooner than it has been, like you said, with dashboard? When would you now expect it to happen, and what advice would you have, if indeed there's anything we can do, for a DWP minister who wants to try to get this over the line and have it brought into a reasonable timetable?
So anything that takes money out of the pockets of the hard-working Great British public is always.
Yes, we need to work out exactly at what point of communication that
somebody needs
comes
to go
in, because we will need to go out to people.
Could people cut themselves off, Mike, please? Thanks.
So anything that takes money away is always a difficulty. All right, and Treasury got nervous in a post-Brexit world, then a COVID world, and you get the picture. And I get that as well. I'm not so naive as not to say that is not an issue. So it is very difficult to do this stuff, but my take is it will happen. What is quite noticeable to me, though, is that every time they talk about pensions, and particularly DC pensions, they talk about it in terms of what can we use that money for. All right. Now, I may be mistaken on this, but I think most of the outcome changes that we're talking about, whether that is AE changes, whether that is decumulation, whether it's pot follows member, all of those things are going to be parked. And I think parked for quite some time. Now, the question is the extent and ability of individual ministers and chancellors to say this is the right thing to do, notwithstanding it is the case that the world is complicated and et cetera, et cetera. And in my view, that probably will happen. It does help that the politics of this are very good. So, bluntly, it helps the low paid, it helps women, it clearly helps in red wall areas where pensions have not traditionally been a product that they were aware of. It's a good thing. If you're thinking long term, it's a really good thing to do. But there are consequences to making that decision. I would actually go further, David. So I spent 5 years as the Financial Inclusion Minister, and I tried my hardest to ensure that we address the 10 million people who don't have £100 savings, right? So I would go further than the AE reforms, and I would say, fine, we will make it on a voluntary basis, but basically just like AE, it would be a default situation. We'll take 1% of your earnings and we'll put it into a savings account that we will then invest in an appropriate way. And after a period of time, you can cash in some of that savings account to, start looking at everything from a honeymoon to weddings to housing deposits and things like that. But mainly, the most important thing is, can you fix your car when it breaks down, and the washing machine when it breaks down, which are the two things that are the biggest problems that the great British public face and cannot afford. And that's why they get into debt. That's why they get into payday lenders and things like that. So I would go further, and it's a good example of, if I had my time again, I would have done AE 2017 reforms shortly after receiving the report. It was pretty much the first thing I did was receive the report. That and the State Pension Age Review, those are the two documents I looked at first when I first got the job. And I would have done that straight away, and I would also have done 1% savings.
Okay.
And if I was in the room with the Treasury, that's almost the thing I would push more than anything else, because I think it would have the most difference to the individual members of the public. And you ask about trying to make a difference in this job, ensuring people have the rainy day savings of even £100, let alone the £500 they really need. That would be game changing.
I've got 1 minute left of this pod, and I want John to ask a question. John Quinnivan. I may be able to get to you, Chris, but I suspect not. Okay,
it's very quick. Thank you, Guy. Thank you for your candor, clarity, and balance. Always appreciated. The narrative to do with the winter fuel allowance in some circles has been that the Labour government care less about pensioners than other members of the voting public, and I don't know whether you agree with that or not. And to some degree, that's not the most important thing. What the question I've got is, if they don't care as much about the pensioners as other voting public, how much more difficult is that for a pensions minister to get any narrative, any agenda, any airtime?
I think it's harsh to say they don't care about pensioners. I don't think that's the case at all. I don't think they get up in the morning and go, we prefer young people to pensioners. But self-evidently, they have chosen to take away a benefit, and it is a benefit, without thinking it through. We all can see that, without being aware of the consequences of that. It does impact, because trust me, and we talked about Emma's job and the ability to see the wood from the trees. she's going to spend a lot of her time defending and dealing with winter fuel payment, WASPI, day-to-day debates in the House of Commons, and that will make it very difficult for her to do the other stuff that she wants to do and that the Prime Minister and the Chancellor are more interested in. And they are more interested in how they can use private pensions for a different way. All right? That's clearly their number one target and goal. All right?
Thank you.
Okay. Chris, very quickly, and then we will have to wrap up. I have one important question to ask, Guy.
Thanks, Henry. I just want to follow up from our conversation last week on selfies. Guy, are you familiar with Aaron Murada, the Indian American who's brought out this concept of selfies?
The answer is yes and no. And to be honest, he's on my reading list to have a listen and a read about it in more detail. So I probably would be the wrong person to give you an erudite and intellectual opinion on it. But I will. I am going to have a proper listen to it and have a proper read about it because it looks interesting, to say the least.
Okay, I'll leave it there, Henry.
That's fine, Chris. Okay, well, look, we are at the end. I have a question, and it's a question which is answered from our previous discussions, Guy. Is City of Troy the best horse ever trained by Aidan O'Brien, or is there another?
Quite clearly not. He's wrong.
Okay, he's wrong. And who is the best horse? Or what is the best horse?
I know nothing about flat racing in my view, but you know, unless they're jumping a big fence at speed, I'm not as interested. But
right.
I just don't think it's. Listen, there are better horses that the great man's trained for sure.
Okay, well, we'll leave it at that. On that bombshell, Pensions Minister doesn't know anything about horses. Yeah,
I'm not the Pensions Minister. That's good.
A former Pensions Minister doesn't know anything
He's a
about
jockey,
horses.
though. He's a jockey. He is a jockey.
He's a jockey. I will hand back. Steve has got some important news on the liquids, which he wants to give us. And I will end this by saying thank you very much, Guy Opperman, former Pensions Minister, former jockey, and not somebody who has much of an opinion on flat racing. Okay.
Brilliant. Guy, thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate that. Thanks for everybody's input and questions. There's a lot of chat in the chat room as well. So we'll try and see if we can send those off to Guy as well. There's a lot to cover. But I hope you enjoyed the session, Guy. Thank you so much. That was really, really informative and useful. Lots of virtual claps as well. You did mention illiquids, Guy, and next week we've got XPS talking about illiquids and how to buy them and all that sort of stuff. So that's going to be very, very interesting. I have got a paper, by the way, Guy, from Aaron Muralida about selfies. So I'll send you the paper as well, which would be very interesting. And if we can get Aaron over to the UK, we might get a few people around a dinner table and he can sort of go through why it's doing so well. So thanks, Guy. Really great. Thanks, Henry, for hosting. Say again? Yeah. Say again, Henry?
I said flog his dodgy wares.
Yeah, Floggy's wares. Yeah. So there you go. But let's pray for peace in the East, as we do every week. Peace in the East and peace in the Middle East. And Guy, thank you so much. The video and podcast will be up later today. And really appreciate everybody's input today. Fantastic session. Thank you, Guy. And best wishes for everything you do in the future, Guy. And no doubt you'll be back very shortly.
Good luck with fatherhood. Right.
Thank you. All right. Cheers now. Take care.
All right. Thanks. Take care. Cheers. Bye. Bye.